Mine is Dorkier than yours, by Naval Cult.
So, it was Pharynx, right?
Uh-huh.
Averting his eyes, Shining Armor took another sip of tea, his safe haven in the face of awkward silence.
You know, I never knew Thorax even had a brother,
the stallion offered, fishing for a mutual topic of interest.
The Hive has always prioritized communal strength and support over who laid which eggs, or who you were born with.
Pharynx monotoned, leaning his head back against the chair.
That said, Thorax and I happen to be born in the same brood clutch, so yes, we are close by changeling standards.
Another sip of tea.
Well, I'm surprised he never mentioned you,
the stallion followed up.
Given how much time he spent with us in the Crystal Empire, I'd have thought the subject would have come up sooner or later.
Pharynx rolled his lavender eyes.
Up until very recently, Thorax and I have had a detached relationship. It's no surprise he'd fail to mention me to his plethora of new pony friends, unless it was somehow relevant to the conversation.
Hovering on a tiny blanket of pink magic, Shining Armor's gold-trimmed cup rested upon a coffee table. The prince eyed his gruff company with a touch of confusion, sitting up straight once more and meeting his gaze. Well, as close as he could tell, anyway. 5 months of living with Thorax, and the prince still struggled to judge proper eye contact with compound eyes.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that,
Shining broached, his voice treading melancholy.
You know, I initially had a bias against changelings, but Thorax proved every one of my assumptions wrong. During his stay in the Empire, he stayed with my wife and I in the castle, and he was a delight. He was polite, friendly, and warm towards everyone around him. It's hard for me to imagine him having a detached relationship with anybody, honestly.
Oh, he's a delight, all right.
Pharynx exhaled, sarcasm dripping off of his tone.
That's exactly why we never saw eye to eye, and why he never got along with the other changelings. It may be an attractive quality to ponies, but being a delight in Chrysalis's hive was like being a sheep in a den of wolves. The most interaction we ever had was me saving his wussy behind from bullies, sometimes multiple times a day.
His tea, once his crutch in an otherwise dry conversation, had been forgotten. Shining Armor now readjusted himself in his seat, his attention harnessed.
I can only imagine how hard that must have been for him. It's a good thing you were around to protect him, though. My sister Twilight had a few bullies when she was in school, but it was always really small-scale stuff and was usually addressed quickly. Thankfully, I never had to intervene.
Mirroring the stallion's newfound investment, Pharynx's lofty posture straightened upright.
Hold on. Twilight?
He parroted.
You don't mean one of Equestria's leaders, do you?
Shining Armor blinked.
Oh, I'm sorry, I totally forgot to mention. Royal Summit today's left me a little scattered. Yeah, Princess Twilight is my little sister. I run the Crystal Empire with my wife, Princess Cadence, now, but I was actually born in Canterlot. And for a time, I was the captain of the Royal Guard there. And these days, I'm in charge of the Crystal Empire's guard teams.
Pharynx's interest had simmered to a boil, and the changeling displayed his pearly whites.
Wow, so your younger sister is a figurehead and you're in charge of your home's military. Maybe we have more in common than I thought.
Clearly taken aback, the Royal Stallion adopted a smile himself.
Hang on, you're in charge of the Hive's defense forces?
Giving a short nod, Pharynx tapped the side of his antler.
You could say it was my calling.
Shining Armor chuckled.
Well, that's awesome, and I can totally relate. Were you always in charge of the Hive's defense forces, even back during Chrysalis's era?
Now bordering excited, Pharynx sat up in his chair.
My position was referred to as lead of patrol, but Chrysalis sought my input on defensive matters too. She was proud and arrogant and didn't want to give any one drone the kind of power a second in command would have. If you ask me, she was afraid it'd make it easier to overthrow her. If there had been an official second in command, though, it would have been me.
That's really impressive,
Shining replied, once more seizing his teacup with his ignited horn. Do you hold the same title now that you're helping Thorax run the hive, or have you taken on more responsibility? When Cadence and I moved to the Crystal Empire, I took on way more responsibilities concerning civilians and politics. Comes with the territory of being a ruler. Pharynx let out a gruff chuckle.
Well, unlike you and your wife, my brother and I didn't take on leadership at the same time. For a good month or so, it was a solo show under him, and it was a laughable attempt at best. Revisiting your assessment, my brother is a delight. Instead of stabilizing the status quo, the very first thing he did was pour all his energy into organizing activities to improve the hive's social aspects. Within a few days, it felt like we were living in a hippie paradise.
Shining Armor choked on his tea, unable to refrain from another chain of chuckling.
That sounds like Thorax, all right. The kind of soul you'd ever meet, but probably not the guy you'd see confronting others or enforcing rules.
He's not. But it's fine, because I am that guy,
Pharynx declared, proudly tapping a hoof to his chest.
What Thorax lacks in toughness, I make up for tenfold. Since I evolved, or whatever, I've taken on all roles relating to hive defense, including training new recruits, overseeing patrol routes, and maintaining the hive's grounds. But yeah, I'll also help Thorax with political tripe when he needs it, even if it's just talking him out of a panic attack every time he gets invited to a political event.
A second aura of magic began to stir a spoon around Shining's cup, and the stallion observed his visage in the murky reflection.
That doesn't sound too terribly different from my current roles. Technically, I'm co-monarch, but my day-to-day duties are usually more on the peacekeeping plane. Does Thorax do anything new now aside from social activities and political meetings?
Shining Armor raised his cup and Pharynx scoffed.
I don't know. Hug changelings?
Tea sprayed in a mist over the coffee table.
Thorax is way too touchy-feely for the stricter aspects of ruling a hive,
Pharynx went on.
He oversees the hive's social aspects, he resolves internal problems, and he helps look after the hive's young. Other than that, I don't know what he does all day. We talk more often now, but I don't make it a point to follow him around when he doesn't need me. He may be a leader now, but he's still a huge dork.
Having finished wiping down the table with a spare napkin, Shining Armor motioned his head, acknowledging the story with a nod.
Well, at least you guys have improved your relationship. Knowing Thorax, I'm sure it means a lot to him. When my sister moved away from Canterlot, she really missed me, and I didn't realize how much it hurt her until much later. I've been doing my best to make up for it since then, but I'd have definitely made a better effort to reach out if I'd known it at the time.
Pharynx gave a dry cackle.
Well, Thorax has always been clingy, that's for sure. When we were nymphs, he wanted to play games all the time, and would hug me till he cracked my shell if I had let him. Frankly, I didn't give him the time of day, but that didn't stop him from trying. He didn't understand the state of the hive and how important it was for him to grow thicker skin if he wanted to stay there. In the end, he opted to leave instead.
Shining Armor adopted a sympathetic look.
Now that the hive has changed, has he found any changelings that are more like him? Or are most of the changelings still, rough around the edges?
Oh, please. If anything, I'm the black sheep now,
Pharynx dismissed.
By this point, Thorax has found best friends all over the hive. He showers the drones with love and attention constantly. He dotes on them as if he were their father, and they adore him for it. Doesn't really sit right with me, but I'm the odd one out here, so my opinion doesn't hold much weight. I'm just happy I got them to start caring about defense and safety again.
The room fell quiet for a time, and Shining Armor excused himself to make another pot of tea. Though Pharynx was perfectly content to not consume leaf water, it didn't damper Shining's thirst. When the stallion returned with his steaming cup, Pharynx nodded to him.
Now, enough about Thorax, the beta changeling proclaimed. Let's hear about how you completely blanked on sharing the fact your alicorn sister runs your country.
Having learned from his mistakes, Shining's animated teacup remained a safe distance from his mouth this time. Well, I wouldn't say that. Twilight takes on sort of a subsidiary role in Equestrian politics. Celestia and Luna run Equestria and deal with the politics, while Twilight focuses more on social health among all creatures. In other words, spreading friendship. We've already made a number of allies largely thanks to her efforts, and her school success is, I think, her best accomplishment.
Talk about perfect timing,
Pharynx muttered.
Sounds like my whimsical hung-solve-all-problems brother became king around the time your sister began spreading equestrian love teachings. Probably the first time in recorded history that ponies and changelings have even been allies, I should add.
Well, Twilight has always loved feeling helpful, Shining said with a grin. Any time she can make Equestria, or even just the other princesses proud of her, is a great day for her. These days she gets that same satisfaction through seeing others respond to her teachings, be they students or other kingdoms. It's funny. She's so grown up now, the princess of friendship. But every time I look at her, she's still the adorable filly who once proudly said I would not be the only friend she'd ever need. Pharynx shot an inquisitive look, and Shining stared back in equal confusion.
Huh. Never heard that one before.
Heard what?
Adorkable. Sounds like the kind of nonsense Thorax would come up with.
Her word, actually. I just ran with it. Shining admitted with a laugh. Have you actually met my sister yet?
Saw her at the meet and greet. She was the one flapping her wings and squealing when the really tall white alicorn asked her to talk about her school, right?
Shining Armor cracked a grin. Yeah, that was her. Pride doesn't mean much coming from her brother. I'm supposed to be proud of her, but she's a pretty memorable pony to meet, so I hope you get the chance sometime. She's intelligent and genuine in the same way Thorax is kind and gentle. Even if you don't have much in common with him, I'm sure you must feel similarly about Thorax. Pharynx teetered his head to and fro, his mouth opening for some sarcastic remark before closing again.
He's definitely a unique changeling, I'll give him that. Memorable isn't the word I'd use, but I do take your point. He's awkward, especially when he's outside his comfort zone, and loses all his confidence at the slightest failure he encounters. Sure, he has his good traits, and yeah, I care about him. But that doesn't mean I don't get secondhand embarrassment every time I step outside the hive with him.
Shining Armor gave a knowing nod. I think that just comes with the territory of being a big brother. Twilight really grew out of her social awkwardness after making friends, but even now she still has panic attacks and gets frazzled when things don't go the way she planned. Some days I miss having to talk her out of a tree, but other times, I see her unraveling at the seams and I can't help but laugh a little bit, watching her friends attempting to do the same thing.
Count yourself lucky,
Pharynx replied with a sigh.
Thorax is every bit the soft shell with zero esteem he was when we were little. He keeps mentioning that the Dragon Lord has been helping him with his assertiveness, but I've seen very little improvement. The only thing that's really changed is the hive, which is adapted to accept the way he is now.
Well, maybe that's not such a bad thing, though, Shining chipped in. I understand that you want him to be tougher, but from what I understand, Chrysalis ruled the hive under a brutal regime for who knows how long. Maybe the warm, social approach that Thorax is gifted with has to come before reintroducing a stricter, more serious aspect. Pharynx planted a hoof to his temple.
Ugh. Now you're starting to sound like my advisor changelings every time I try to vent to them.
Now a free-flowing part of their conversation, Shining let out yet another laugh. Well, let's switch gears a bit then. Alright, what's the cringiest thing you've ever seen Thorax do? I doubt it can top the one I have for Twilight. Pharynx's lavender eyes narrowed.
Is that a challenge, Stallion?
Shining wore his cockiest of smirks.
It sure is. Bring it on.
Pharynx's onset look bordered on being villainous.
Okay, so, when we were extremely little, and I mean you could drop-kick us like a ball little, Thorax discovered a type of stone in the hive's lower chambers that could be used as chalk. Well, he was so smitten with his discovery that he decided to go and write along all the walls of every corridor he came across. I'd been taking a nap, so whatever mischief he had been up to was completely lost to me. Later on, I come out to find other nymphs snickering at me from around every corner and weird markings along the hallways.
Displaying his investment via a sound smirk plastered across his face, Shining Armor sat back in his chair, giving his undivided attention. Pharynx had begun to motion with his hooves as he went on, as well as display facial expressions. The irritation he'd felt at the time seemed to revisit him along with the memories.
So I follow the markings, and lo and behold, I find Thorax sitting alone in a corner, drawing one of many, many crude drawings of us playing together, hugging, and whatever else. I then realized that's what he had been drawing on all the walls. He turns to me and goes,
"Pharynx, look! I found a rock that makes pictures!"
There was an entire crowd of nymphs, and even a few older changelings chittering their fangs out. I wanted to crawl in my bed burrow and die.
Upon the conclusion, Shining shook his head and held back his chortles.
Oh, come on! That was more adorable than cringy. You try having a reputation in a hive already full of misfits, and then try living down Big Brother and Me pictures as far as the eye can see,
Pharynx countered, laying against his armrest.
It took me weeks, if not months, to get the other nymphs to steer clear of me again.
Well, I'll have to bring it up with Thorax the next time I see him, Shining joked.
So, Thorax, you never told me you were an artist. Whatever became of those Big Brother and Me pictures?
First he'll turn red, then he'll stutter because he can't bring himself to openly admit it nor pretend like it didn't happen.
Pharynx smirked.
Then he'll do that awkward smile he does all the time.
I know exactly the one you're talking about too. Shining Armor piled on with a lift of his hoof. This one time he accidentally broke a castle vase, and Cadence grilled him about what he thought happened to it. Oh, she was having so much fun watching him squirm. She's got a sly side not very many ponies know about. Pharynx knowingly shook his head.
He's the worst liar in the hive. Couldn't hold a poker face if his life depended on it. When we were adolescents, he'd always tell me he was practicing his hissing like I'd tell him to, but I know full well he was just off frolicking in a field of flowers somewhere.
His diaphragm far too compressed for consuming further tea, Shining Zara laid his cup down to rest again. You know, you've got a really dry sense of humor, and I think I like it.
I'd say I aim to please, but then I'd be lying.
Pharynx's toothy smirk subsided.
What about you? Go on now, wow me with this hyped sister story of yours.
Cocking a brow, Shining Armor matched the changeling's shrewd look.
All right. So, when we were younger, Twilight and I were inseparable. She wasn't old enough for magic school yet, and I wasn't old enough to enlist for Royal Guard duty yet, so we ended up doing basically everything together. One of those many things was to go trick-or-treating for Nightmare Night.
It was Pharynx's turn to blast off an eyebrow.
You went trick-or-whatting for Nightmare what now?
Nightmare Night, Shining Armor replied aptly. It's an unofficial equestrian holiday. Ponies of all ages dress up in various costumes of characters, creatures, and things like that, and go around their neighborhood to collect candy, though normally it's just the kids that get candy. They go in groups, and each group has at least one adult chaperone. Originally, it was based around legends of Nightmare Moon, the villainous alter ego of Princess Luna, but it stuck around even after she returned because everyone enjoyed it so much.
You literally can't make this stuff up,
Pharynx replied flatly, curled across the armrest of his chair like a bed.
And here I thought hoisting an upside-down tree and singing with lanterns up to a built fire was kind of weird.
You... what?
Nothing. One of the hive's nymphs brought back a holiday from your sister's school, and Thorax insisted upon making it a thing,
Pharynx passively explained, waving a hoof about.
It's irrelevant, keep going. You and your sister had too much free time, and then what?
Okay. Well, anyway, Twilight and I went trick-or-treating by ourselves most years because our parents tended to get busy with work. This particular year, she went as Princess Celestia because, well, she's just always loved Princess Celestia. So I get distracted by a food cart, the tastiest apple fritters I've ever had in my life, mind you. Next thing I know, I turn around and Twilight's just gone. Mouthful of fritter, I start galloping around the square looking for her until suddenly there's an ear-splitting cry from behind me. Having been entirely disenchanted, Pharynx's brow raised once again. The changeling's attention heightened as Shining's grin returned. So I turn around and Twilight slams into my leg so hard that I jump in shock. I feared the worst and prepared myself, but then I hear another scream from in front of me. This young filly dressed in a ladybug costume is shaking like a leaf, clearly confused, and next to another who looks even more confused. I look down at Twilight and try to ask what's wrong, but all she says is, "Scary lady!" Of course, at that point, the filly's mother assumed the worst, and I got the biggest glare of my elder brother career. As you can probably guess, the night fizzled out after that for her, and I ended up taking us home. After gently prodding the issue for a good half hour, I discovered that she was terrified of ladybugs, i.e., the costume that filly had been wearing. Scary lady was her way of saying scary ladybug.
Pharynx's brow plummeted.
You've got to be kidding me.
I mean, to be fair, earlier that year we had a huge swarm of ladybugs invade our house, and I think the sheer number of them freaked Twilight out, left an impression on her.
Still, ladybugs are harmless. In fact, that's their entire reputation.
Exactly what my dad said.
Well, I have to give you kudos. The miscommunication of your sister insulting some kid and or her mother makes a story as much as the climax.
Pharynx sneered.
Unfortunately, though, I can match it. Thorax is terrified of spiders, to the point where even now he'd probably cower behind me, despite being both taller and bigger than I am. My default transformation to deal with threats used to be a massive spider, but it freaked Thorax out even more than the bullies I was trying to defend him from. So I had to create some new creature instead.
Shining Armor gave a nonchalant shrug of his shoulders, pressing back into his cushion with unwavering smugness.
Oh yeah? I went to Ponyville to visit Twilight the other week, and I found her in town doing some grocery shopping. She'd been at the same stall for 20 minutes because she couldn't decide on the right produce. The shop clerks looked about ready to quit their jobs on the spot.
The other week? Yesterday, Thorax came trotting into my bed hive before dawn, jostled me awake, and dragged me up hive, humming some stupid tune all the while, mind you, all just to show me the new theater stage he and some of the drones had spent all night building for their silly plays.
Shining Armor caught his snicker just in time.
Okay, see, but Thorax is just trying to involve you in his life, the stallion countered. Adult Thorax showing you his new stage is like Nymph Thorax showing you Big Brother pictures. Twilight is adorkable 24/7 whether it has to do with me or not. One time she turned the Kennelot Library into a book fort hotel for books, and even had a check-in station for new books who wanted to stay with her.
Pharynx let off a one-note cackle.
Ha! Oh, you're a funny pony. You think my brother's worst shenanigans stop and end with me? Oh, no. His Highness King Thorax, leader of the mighty changelings, introduced a new policy the other week, encouraging all changelings to console each other with physical meals if they were feeling down. In other words, hugging became an actual policy.
Their duel of stories having reached a ridiculous climax, Shining Armor fell into a fit of hysterics whilst Pharynx silently chittered, unable to hold back his heightened grin. For a time, the pair sat in their revelry, allowing it to consume an otherwise dull afternoon. When at last able to regain his breath, Shining Armor met Pharynx's gaze, this time confident in holding it. I gotta be honest, as much as I adore Thorax, I never thought I'd find a changeling I'd have so much in common with.
A few months ago, I never thought I'd see ponies as anything but food,
Pharynx stated flatly, but returning Shining's smile all the same.
The more I spend around them, the more I spot the occasional similarity. You, though, I'm concerned that you're just me as a pony, albeit less intimidating.
Hey, I resent that. I can be plenty intimidating when I want to be.
The stallion rebutted with a chuckle.
I think the term you're looking for is gruff.
Pharynx opened his mouth, but the sound of oak doors opening fell forth. As the pair turned in unison, a familiar sight filled their view, and subtle smiles sprung from all four faces in the room.
Shining Armor!
Came the peppy voice of Twilight Sparkle, who wasted no time in crossing the room in flight to meet the seated stallion.
Hey, Twilight, you're back!
Shining put out, returning the mare's hug and standing to greet her.
So, how'd it go?
Substituting her elation for mockery, Twilight curled her lip.
Well, you know, about as well as you'd expect. The Saddle Arabians were quiet, the Lax were yowed, the Hippogriffs were invested, and the Dragons were indifferent. It was good, though. I got to talk a little more about my efforts with the school, and every creature had a stake of interest in that topic, for obvious reasons. All in all, I think it went well. Princess Luna was just happy it only took 2 hours instead of 5 this time.
Well, that sounds great,
Shining replied, gently ruffling the alicorn's mane.
To think you're attending the real bigwig meetings with Cadence and her aunt now. Remember a couple years ago when you were having a princess identity crisis?
Twilight's expression retreated to a pout.
Hold on, how did you find out about that? I never told you about
Cadence.
Duh. Shining interrupted with a revealed tongue.
She said something about you being done about your role as a princess and how she and your aunt and her sister all started to sing with you. I admit, I got kinda lost at that part, but I think I understand the gist of it.
Oh, she's so devious,
Twilight whispered under her breath, her elation turned pout now budding into a playful look.
She told me she didn't get the chance to talk to you about that summit much. I'll have to have a little talk with her the next time I visit, that's for sure.
Adjacent to their conversation, Thorax modestly entered the room, first casting a warm glance at Twilight's reunion with her brother, before turning that attention to his own. In stark contrast to Shining Armor, Pharynx hadn't budged from his spot, but it didn't stop Thorax from beaming at him.
Hey, Pharynx.
Pharynx lazily flopped his head over one shoulder, catching the taller changeling's eye.
Come on, Thorax. It took you being gone for the better part of a year for me to say, hey, like I hadn't seen you in a while. You were in there for a measly 2 hours.
Instinctively rubbing the back of his head, Thorax gave a little giggle.
Well, I guess that's true. That doesn't mean I can't greet you because I want to, though.
Seating himself by his brother's armrest, Thorax watched the royal ponies commune. Their energy filled the space, and Twilight had taken to lightly hovering in the air to match her brother's eye level. It all got a chuckle from the changeling.
All right, give it to me.
Torn from his thoughts, Thorax's eyes dilated as he pivoted in place.
Huh?
Pharynx met the younger changeling with a devilish grin.
How did your bigwig meeting really go, Thorax?
Thorax tilted his head.
Come on. Are we going to war with anybody?
Pharynx asked ominously.
Please tell me we're going to war with somebody.
Triggered on cue, Thorax's eyes widened up again, as did a grimace contort his face.
Pharynx, don't say things like that,
he hissed.
Why would you even expect things like that to happen, let alone say them?
Pharynx's sly grin grew, fed generously by his flawless goading.
Because I relish the faces you make, and because I'm eager to stretch my tactical decision muscles, but mostly the other thing.
Thorax hung up a frown.
Very funny, Pharynx. You know, I asked you to come with me because I want you to take these things seriously. I know I'm the one who does the political meetings and stuff, but it's important that you at least know what's going on. What happened if something happened to me and you needed to take command of the hive?
Okay, hold your hooves there, my liege, because there are already several flaws with your brilliant premise.
Pharynx began, erecting a hoof.
First off, don't forget that you also brought me along because this is your first summit meeting and you wanted to use me as your comfort zone. Let's not kid ourselves, I'm not merely your escort, I'm your emotional recharge station.
Thorax's frown evaporated, promptly replaced by a look of horror. A small blush crept at the base of his cheeks.
But secondly,
Pharynx interjected, lightly punching the crouched changeling on the side.
Don't create dire scenarios from hypotheticals, Thorax. It feeds your anxiety. You know I can handle the hive just fine. More importantly, nothing will ever happen to you while I'm around. You know that.
Rubbing his shoulder, Thorax conceded defeat, locked eyes with his brother, and salvaged his former smile.
All right, I get it, Pharynx. And yes, thanks for agreeing to come. I do want you to learn more about this stuff, but you're right. Things weren't as intimidating with you here, and it really helped.
Some semblance of a genuine look shone through Pharynx's face.
You're welcome. Maybe next time just tell your host that the least they can do for the escorts is give us some grub while we wait for your tea party to end.
I'm sorry. I just have to say, I love the dynamic you two have.
Two pairs of compound eyes darted ahead like those of spooked deer, finding both Twilight and her brother watching them with adoration. For exactly how long they'd been standing there spectating was unclear, but the gleam in Twilight's eyes was enough to make Pharynx shudder.
Thanks, Twilight,
Thorax said, getting to his hooves again and turning to Pharynx as he did the same.
We have our differences, to be sure, and still have some catching up to do, but for all the trash talk and teasing, I wouldn't trade him for anything.
Thorax beamed a wholesome look, but it was swiftly lost to Pharynx's rolling eyes.
You're welcome. I've never had the occasion to say it before, but I think it's great that your brother is here to help you look after the hive, Thorax,
Twilight continued, offering the brothers her warmest smile.
It reminds me a bit of Princess Celestia and her sister, Luna. While capable of ruling alone, Celestia is so much happier ruling with her sister, and I imagine you feel similarly about your brother.
Thorax perked up, lifting an energetic hoof at the royal comparison.
Oh, how many times in one day can I say thanks, Twilight? Yeah, things are so much smoother now. I mean, Pharynx still prefers to keep to himself, but he's definitely found his place in the new hive, and I'm so happy for it.
You alluded to some new policies you came up with, Shining Armor spoke up, casting Pharynx a sly eye. You don't think you'll get him to participate in those, then? Thorax chuckled. Pharynx shot daggers.
Oh, physical meal therapy?
Thorax clarified.
No, definitely not. He's not into the whole physical affection equals energy and mood restoration thing. Actually, I count myself lucky he even lets me hug him on my birthday and for special occasions.
Oh, for the love of spare me a scene, Thorax, please.
Pharynx groaned, abruptly jabbing his head into his brother's flanks and sliding him along the floor.
Get your pixie behind in gear. It's about time we got going. It's a long trip back and we're burning daylight. You wouldn't want the drones losing their shells because you're not there to referee any scuffles on who gets the cooler looking paintbrush, would you?
Well, okay. It was really nice to see you again, Twilight,
Thorax stammered out, glancing over his shoulder at the giggling alicorn.
You too, Shining Armor. I'll let you know if I can find some time to visit the Empire soon.
Sounds great, Thorax, Shining Armor replied with a wave of his hoof. You know Cadence and I are always delighted to have you. Oh, and Pharynx? I wouldn't worry too much. Remember, embarrassing each other is what siblings do best.
Yeah,
Pharynx mumbled, nudging Thorax harder when the changeling attempted to dig his hooves into the floor.
Nice meeting you, Armor. Same to you, Princess. Good luck with the school. Ocellus never shuts up about how much she loves her classes whenever she visits home.
Oh, that's kind of you to say, Pharynx, thanks.
Twilight pieced together, forcing a smile.
You should maybe visit the, Ponyville sometime. It's a beautiful town where I live, near but not too near the school full of impressionable children, you know? See you guys, tell Spike I said hi, okay?
Punctuating Thorax's farewell, the oak doors were enveloped in a crimson aura and closed with a thud, leaving only a muffled conversation from the other side. Left to themselves in the lavish waiting room, Twilight let out a deep sigh while her brother cast her a knowing smirk. Well, that was real subtle at the end there.
I love how protective he is, but he can be a little much at times,
Twilight explained, staring at the closed oak doors as if expecting them to open again.
He's probably the bluntest, most confrontational member of the summit. During the meet and greet, even Prince Rutherford backed down from a spat with him.
He may be gruff, but he's not such a bad guy,
Shining dismissed, using his own aura to open the doors again himself.
He's just not one for small talk or sentimental things, and he knows what his priorities are.
Stepping ahead with a courteous nod, Twilight gave the stallion an inquisitive brow.
Yeah, from the looks of it, you guys were really hitting it off. What were you talking about anyway? Anything you found that you have in common?
Closing the chamber doors for a final time behind him, Shining Armor raised his own brow, his smirk evolving.
Oh, just some mutual interests and run-of-the-mill guard duties and things, nothing major. Although as it so happens, we both have younger siblings who are known to get a little anxious from time to time.
Anxious? Wait a second. Shining Armor, you didn't.
Didn't what?
Earlier you said embarrassing each other is what siblings do best. You didn't spend all that time in there sharing embarrassing stories about Thorax and I, did you?
Both sets of hooves came to a pause, and Shining Armor met his sister's scrutinizing gaze with a sheepish smile.
No?
Oh, really? And I bet you told Pharynx all about the ladybug story you'll love to tell everyone about so much.
I did not.
And you probably forgot to mention the fact that you were the one who told me ladybug spots are, and I quote, extra eyes that watch you wherever you go, too.
I never said anything like that. Why would I say something like that?
Because you had a mean streak as a teenager.
I totally did not. Did we ever fight when we were growing up, Twily?
No, but that has nothing to do with it. Just because we never fought doesn't mean you weren't a subpar big brother at times.
Ouch.
What? It's true.
I'm hurt, Twily. I thought you had more faith in me than that. Pinkie Pie said you...
The echoes of the siblings' voices fell to silence as they descended along the summit's corridor staircase.